Good morning and welcome to Midweek Musing for Wednesday the 17th of June. We're going to do something slightly different this week. We're going to look in detail at a particular verse in the Bible, a verse that people could quite easily look at in the context of what we're going through and say this actually brings comfort and blessing. It's a well-known verse to many. It's in Romans 8:28. I've highlighted it here in green, and it says this in the NIV. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And it's easy to read that verse as saying, whatever is going on, even in the middle of this current crisis, a crisis like we have never seen before, God is at work and God is going to bring good from it. For people like us, people who love him, people who've been called. And that can bring comfort. But I was reading a book that's been written by N.T. Wright, a prominent New Testament scholar, in responding to, thinking about how we respond to this crisis. And he raises some interesting questions about this verse. What does it actually mean? How are we supposed to understand it? And we can see the questions by simply looking at how different translations translate it. So as we've seen, the New International Version talks about God working for the good of those who love him. The NRSV has it slightly differently. It's not that God is working, but that all things work together for good for those who love God. So it's as though because people love God, for some reason, everything works together. It's a similar idea, but with a different emphasis. In the first, it is God who is the subject who is working. In the second, it is all things that are the subject that are working together for good. The New Living Translation seems to combine the two. And it says that we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God. So it's God is making everything work together for good. Three slightly different perspectives on it. But in all of them, there's the idea that we can actually just sit back and let it happen. Either God does this, or because we love God, things just work out. And that can bring confidence at times like this. But the question that Wright asks is that actually what it means? And he points to the fact that this word works doesn't just mean working to do something, but it's working with somebody. So if we look at where this verb is also used in the letters of Paul, we find it in Romans 8:28, but it's also in 1 Corinthians 16:16, where he talks about people who join in the work. In 2 Corinthians 6, he speaks about God's co-workers. So there's the idea that it's not just about working, but it's about working with someone. When we look at the noun, so not the verb, but the noun, again in Paul's writing, he uses it 12 times. And in all of these cases, there is the idea of working together. He talks about co-workers in Christ Jesus in Romans 16. In Philippians 2, he talks about this person called Epaphroditus, his brother, his co-worker. In 1 Thessalonians, he speaks about Timothy, who is our brother and co-worker, and so on. So there's the idea that whenever Paul uses this word, he's talking about somebody working with somebody else. So why would this occurrence in Romans 8 be any different? And the Revised Standard Version actually points towards this. And it says that we know that in everything God works for good with those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. So it's not just that God is working, but he works with people like us to bring good about. And is that the challenge that this verse actually has for us today? Wright, in his book, summarizes it like this, that Paul is offering a Jesus-shaped picture of a suffering, redeeming providence in which God's people are themselves not simply spectators, not simply beneficiaries, but active participants. They are called according to his purpose, since God is even now using their groaning at the heart of the world's pain as the vehicle for the Spirit's own work, holding that sorrow before the Father, creating a context for the multiple works of healing and hope. Such God lovers are therefore shaped according to the pattern of the Son, the cruciform pattern in which God's justice and mercy, his faithfulness to the covenant and to creation, are displayed before the world in tears and toil, lament and labour. You might want to think about those words for a bit. Some of them are a bit complicated, but Wright is suggesting that what Romans 8 is talking about in verse 28 is not that we sit back and just wait for God to bring good out of this, but that we seek opportunities where we can have the privilege of working with God to bring good out of this situation into people's lives. Have a think. What do you think this verse is telling us? Here's some questions to think about. How do we engage with this verse if we think it is about God working for good? How do we engage with this verse if we think it is about God working with us for good? What things might God be doing at this time? And how can we be his co-workers in doing that? Let's seek opportunities where we can work together with God for good. What an amazing privilege that is.